You can achieve your weekly goals in one day if you follow a specific protocol that is guaranteed to make you 5 times more productive by helping you access flow state, an altered state of consciousness in which you feel your best and perform your best. I've built this protocol looking into the latest research of how to access the flow states, and it works very well for me and for each one of our clients to really skyrocket our productivity without ever burning out. And the best thing is that it's actually really fun to do. Welcome back. My name is Jon Castillo, founder of Submaster Peak Performance Institute for Entrepreneurs. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing because we release weekly videos to help you scale with peak focus, clarity, discipline, and self-belief. So this video is about flow states, what they are and how to manufacture them in your life. But we first have to start by discussing what is a flow state. A flow state is not something that you do. It is something that you are in. In other words, it's an altered state of mind, just like a sleep or trance or dreams are. You don't do dreams. You go to bed, relax enough so that your mind eventually alters, accesses sleep, and eventually goes into REM sleep, which is where dreams happen. In other words, you cannot choose to do a flow state. You can create the conditions for a flow state to emerge, right? So if someone is telling you that you can absolutely engineer flow states, that is inaccurate. That doesn't work. What you can do is create the necessary conditions in order for your mind enter a flow state. It's a subtle nuance, but it's important because unless you understand how the brain and the mind work together to create a flow state, you will never have access to it. And the first thing you have to do is dial in the task. So there's this concept in flow research called autonomy, which is your ability to freely choose what to work on. If you are trying to access a flow state, doing tasks you don't like, you don't inherently believe are worth, that you haven't chosen, then that's not going to happen. Step one is really working on something you care about, that is meaningful, that you have selected for yourself. That is the first concept, the concept of autonomy. You need to dial in the task to have a chance of accessing a flow state. Then comes two, dial in the difficulty. So out of all of the flow conditions that we can create, also called flow triggers, the one with the most research behind it is something called the challenge skill ratio, which is based on a very old psychological law called the Yerkes-Dodson law. In essence, what this postulates is that we need to adjust to the difficulty of the task. If the task is way above our skill level, we get anxious. If the task is very below our skill level, we get bored. In other words, we need to stay in what Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, which is the leading researcher on flow state over the past 25 years, he recently passed away, called as flow channel, which is in essence where the relationship between your skill level and the difficulty of the task is optimal. The optimal stretch was calculated by Google engineers 15 years ago and is about 4%. So if the difficulty of the task is 4% outside of the current level of your abilities, you will sustain that flow state indefinitely without getting too anxious and burning out, without getting too bored and getting disengaged. 4% is the optimal stretch to stay in a flow channel that allows you to sustain that flow state. Right? So first we dial in the task, then we dial in the autonomy, then we dial in the timing. This is very important because a flow is not an on-off switch. It's not something you go in and then you go out of. No, it is a cycle. There's a process in which we need to follow. We first need to struggle. Struggle means that we are summoning the neurochemicals in our brain to eventually trigger a flow state. In order to actually release it, we need to take a step back. We need to release and relax before we actually access that flow state, and finally we need to recover. In essence, we need to go through all this full cycle, which means that we cannot sustain a flow state for hours at a time. In 1950s, Nathaniel Klein, a chronobiologist, discovered that the human body goes through cycles of about 90 to 120 minutes in which we have peaks and troughs in our energy. So the ideal setup for a flow state is about 1.5 hours to 2 hours. That is what one flow state should last for maximum results. And after those 90 to 120 minutes, you totally rest and recover. You give yourself the chance, the brain, to encode that new information, to replenish those neurochemicals, and get ready again for a new flow state. Once you get really good at this and you can condition your brain to rest and recover very quickly, you can have several flow states in the same day, which is going to really change the game for you. So step number 3 is to dial in the timing. Understand that you cannot sustain a flow state for 5 hours because your brain needs to replenish those neurochemicals and you cannot go against your own natural cycles. So step 3, dial in the timing. Step 4 is dial in the consequences or the urgency. And this is very important because this is a flow trigger that I created in order to emulate the high consequences that some action sports have when they're trying to access flow state. So imagine that you are surfing or you are skiing or you're doing some sort of wild stunt. The high consequences there is literally death. You can drown, you can crash, all sorts of things can happen to you if you're not careful. These high consequences naturally trigger your brain into full alertness and focus and eventually flow state. But during our day-to-day, how do we manufacture that? How can we create high consequences to force our brain to focus? Well, I found a way by using a timer. I just go into Google, click on timer, put in 90 minutes, and once I click play, I force myself to start a flow state. I am conditioning myself to work very fast against the clock, which gives me the ability to harness that flow trigger. So step number 4 is to dial in the urgency or the consequences of every work block. And finally, we have to dial in the feedback. So as I always say, collecting feedback on your performance is really one of the few hacks that exist in business. If you're consistently understanding how you can become better day over day, you will eventually run laps about everybody else. And what's cool is that immediate feedback is one of the most important flow triggers. So what you do is at the end of those 90 to 120 minutes, you take 1 minute to understand how much did you get done, how far away you were from your analysis of what you were going to accomplish. So let's say that you decided you were going to do a 1,500 word essay in those 90 minutes. And then at the end of the 90-minute work session, you only wrote 1,300 that you're proud of. Well, that information is very useful because you can understand why did you fall short of your own expectation? How can you improve going forward? Only this process of looking at data and understanding how to improve is already going to skyrocket not only your ability to get into flow states, but also to become better over time. Right? So this is how you create the conditions. First, you dial in the task, something you care about, something you choose for yourself. This is based on the concept of autonomy. Then we dial in the difficulty. If we attempt to do something that is too far away from a skill level, we are going to burn out. If it's too low, we're going to get bored. We need to find the flow channel, the optimal stretch, that 4% over our abilities. Then 3, dial in the timing. You cannot sustain a flow state for 5 hours. No, it's 90 to 120 minutes per session. Understand that it is a cycle that you need to go through and your brain needs time to replenish those neural chemicals. Then 4, dial in the consequences of the urgency. You work against a timer. Force yourself to work fast. This is going to speed up your ability to get into a flow state. And finally, dialed in feedback. Get immediate feedback on how well did you perform, how far off is your skill level from the task, and how can you improve going forward. Taking all of these elements into consideration, I built something called the Ring Fence session, which is a 90-minute work session that I use to schedule all my week, and I literally deploy this. I always work on a task with a very specific, clear idea of what the task that I'm going to be doing that I chose for myself. I work against a timer and I collect feedback at the end of the 90-minute work session to improve over time. This is the secret to having daily flow state. It works very well and I highly encourage you to start implementing it. Because if you can be 5 times more productive than the average entrepreneur, you are going to win. It doesn't matter how old you are, how skilled you are, it doesn't matter, because you will learn it. You will move fast. You will eventually win. This is one of the aspects that we help our clients master. If you truly want to take yourself to the next level, work 5 hours a day and really make a killing in business without any burnout, any procrastination, that is average performance stuff, book a call with us that, if it makes sense, we will help you become the most elite version of yourself so you can win in business the easy way. And until next time.